Lincoln was supposed to have abolished slavery in 1865. What if I told you in about 40 odd years later, it was thriving, maybe more than ever? There was plantations, thousands of acres big. These things spanned almost as big as the largest plantations of old antebellum slavery. I'll be telling the story of just a small fraction of the slaves under just one of these slave masters. I'm talking about the imposing 6 foot, over two, almost 300 pound devil known as John W. Pace. The first story, we're mainly talking about the Tinsley brothers, as well as just a little bit about these other two, Archer and Q.F. Lewis, who were 12 and 10 respectively, and we know nothing else about them. We don't know what they look like, when they were taken, really, how their lives played out. They were just taken from their mother's arms and lost to history. These other two, however, Luke and Henry Tinsley, they were 13 and 10 years old. And none of these four learned or knew how to read or write and were forced to work, forced to be slaves before they even really hit puberty. Pace stole them because their mother owed them a debt because she had borrowed money 3 years prior, or he paid it for her on her behalf 3 years prior. He stole the Tinsley brothers when they were big enough to pick cotton in order to pay them off. To pay off. Okay. Luke began bulking, getting bigger, becoming into the frame of a man much quicker than Henry, of course, since he was a decent bit older. With Henry having a skitter just to keep up with his brother. They were also under the constant watch of other black men, forced to watch them, such as, also against their will, who were described as servants, such as P. Johnson, age 45, a man taken from Virginia, or Josephine Dawson, a 35-year-old wife and mother, forced to be a slave, likely for the rest of her life. And like almost everyone else in this, we don't know how their story ends. All we know is that they were taken, their lives stripped from them. It wasn't even just like their childhoods for like some of these, it's just their entire lives stolen. And you couldn't even help them, really. It was just like the old slave days, or even like Nazi Germany. If you tried to help these runaway slaves, you were punished. You would be kidnapped as well. You would also be tortured. There was a story of this man named Dave Scott. He got away from his plantation, and Pace sent dogs and arrested everyone on his family farm. Everyone. His entire family gone in an instant. Scott's wife, four other family members, as well as two just people nearby, were found guilty by the bot judge, James Kennedy, and was sold to Cosby, George Cosby, who I will be talking about later. Right now, mostly I'm focusing on Pace. He was like the kingpin. He was the one in charge of it all. He was just he was the king at the very top. Or the story of another man, Lum Johnson. His sentence was almost over after years and years and years of grueling work, of debilitating injuries from whipped, slashed, everything, anything you could imagine. He finally was about to have his sentence end. He was charged with stealing potatoes and forced to resign. He was forced to come back. He couldn't get out. Even when his contract was over, they set up a mock trial and said that now you gotta return because you did da 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 da. That didn't even happen. There's so many stories. There's so many of these people whose lives we don't even know anything about. I'm just trying to at least shed light on a few of them. A few more would be a man named Williams, who needed to work 7 months. He of course knew it was going to be bad, but it was worse than he could have ever possibly imagined. He resisted. He wanted to actually live his life on his own terms. He didn't want to be treated as a literal slave. So he was whipped almost every single day that he worked there. Almost every single day. Usually with his pants pulled up to his ankles and his back bare. While other men, Pat Hill, Ed Moody, they're both 17. They tried running away within a month after they were kidnapped by Pace and his goons. They held a mock trial saying, "Oh, you did this." When I say mock trial, I mean a trial, but not really. It's kind of like modern day immigration trials. It's just the facade of one. There really isn't one. It's so biased, and the juries are all way. They're all paid off, so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. You can be innocent. It does not matter. As well as the fact that they were arrested by a justice of the peace who, coincidentally, worked for Pace. They both were charged with a 6-month conviction for breaking their contract in Tallapoosa County. And when I mean breaking their contract, it's they'd force these black people to sign these labor contracts. You weren't allowed to ever leave. Most of these people couldn't even read because they hadn't been allowed to for decades. Like, how can you learn it if you never taught it? People inherently don't really. People don't inherit. They're not born with the ability to read it, right? That's something you learn. If your parents and your parents' don't know how to do it, how in the hell are you supposed to do that ever? But back to the story at hand. They returned to their work pace with an additional 6 months' work, and now classified as criminal convicts, so they could be treated even worse, not just as laborers, but now as criminals. That's the thing about the name criminal or convict. You don't have to be a bad person to have it. Is someone, for example, with an addiction, a bad person? Maybe the person that sold it to them is a bad person. The person on it isn't necessarily a bad person. They just are someone in need of help. These people were in need of help, but just classified as criminals so they could be thrown by the wayside and treated even worse, locked up at night, whipped daily, humanity and soul, will broken day in and day out. Almost every black person in Tallapoosa know what happened at the Pace Farms, as well as the other ones like Turner, like Cosby, like McCree. They knew the unbelievably barbaric and downright medieval treatment of these black men, and for the black women, it was even worse. They also faced this medieval treatment of being whipped daily, having your humanity stripped from you. But they were also forced to submit to these white men's beds as well. Not only clean their houses, do their dishes, do their laundry, but also they were forced to be used for sex. Because these white men believed these women were just property. When you boil down a person or a woman to just her biology, you are dehumanizing her. You're making it so that she is no longer a person. She is just a pussy. She's just tits. That's it. She's not a person anymore. She's just an object of pleasure, not a human. That's how they do it. That's how they make it allowed. That's how they make it so that people accept it. It's by making these people not seem as human. Because we're a lot more willing to force, for example, horses to work without any compensation, whatever, because they're a horse. They're not a person. So if these black people aren't people, then they don't need the same treatment as a white man or a man, as they saw. I'm going to end off with one final story. Pat Hill was a black man during this time as well. He was led out half naked in front of. He also tried to escape. He was led out half naked in front of the other laborers. He was bent at the waist and forced to squat, both hands behind his knees. He was whipped. He was whipped at least 15 times. This was done to disincentivize black people from trying to rebel, from trying to escape. It's a clan-like tactic of punishing one person so that everyone else in the community is too scared to rise up and rebel. Because you don't have to kill everybody. You just have to make it so that they're all too afraid to do anything